You're watching the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. On today's programme, how the growing demand for gas around the world could put global climate targets at risk. As NATO troops withdraw from Afghanistan, we look at the risks the country is facing from the climate crisis. And Green Fingers raising awareness of green issues at the Hampton Court Palace Garden Festival. Hello and welcome to the UK's only daily climate news show, where we track the changes happening to our world right now and meet those coming up with the solutions. And we're going to start today at our data dashboard and take a look at this number here. Now, this shows an estimate of human-induced global warming since the Industrial Revolution. In 2015, more than 190 countries signed the Paris Agreement to limit this number to 2 degrees, preferably 1.5 degrees. To do that will require a huge reduction in the use of fossil fuels such as oil and gas. But according to the International Energy Agency, global demand for gas is set to increase, putting aims to reach net zero emissions by 2050 at risk. Well, they found that in 2020, global natural gas demand dropped by 1.9% because of an exceptionally mild winter in the north and the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. But demand is expected to rise by 3.6% this year as lockdowns ease and economies recover. Now, part of the increase in demand is thought to be because of high temperatures driving demand for air conditioning across the Northern Hemisphere. Now, in recent weeks, parts of the United States and Canada have experienced record temperatures, while Moscow recorded its hottest ever June day, and national records were also set in Finland, Belarus and Estonia. Well, the IEA is forecasting that unless major policy changes to curb global gas consumption are introduced, demand will just keep growing. By 2024, they estimate an overall 7% rise from pre-COVID levels. And that would mean global targets to reach net zero emissions by 2050 would be missed. Well, joining me now is Dr. AJ Gambier, Senior Research Fellow at Imperial College London's Grantham Institute for Climate Change and the Environment. Welcome to you. It's easy perhaps to understand why demand for gas may have dropped during the pandemic, but why is consumption tipped to rise so much in the years ahead?
Well, I think that, as you were saying, there's been this rebound from the COVID-19 pandemic. We're seeing a lot of fast economic growth in a number of regions, and a lot of our energy infrastructure and assets are still designed to work off fossil fuels. Now, gas is, if you like, the cleanest of the fossil fuels, of coal, oil and gas, but it's still too dirty if we're to operate in a global economy which is trending towards net zero carbon dioxide emissions, which is what we need to be on track to meet the Paris Agreement goal of well below 2 degrees Celsius and pursuing efforts towards 1.5 degrees. So, we're seeing this economic rebound, and we're seeing that depending, if you like, on a lot of gas energy. But what we really need to do is transition away from all fossil fuels as quickly as possible.
Well, yes, and where does the onus for that shift lie? Are there some countries that are more reliant on gas than others?
I mean, yes, there are lots of countries across the world, in Europe and elsewhere, that use a lot of gas in their power generation. We've seen shifts from coal to gas-fired power in the United States. That alone has actually been responsible for a large reduction in carbon dioxide emissions in the United States. That might seem like a really good thing, but there's only so far that can go in terms of moving us towards this net zero carbon economy. So, there are lots of countries like that which have traditionally relied on dirtier, if you like, coal-fired power and are now using gas-fired power. But the real long-term solution comes from zero carbon power, from renewables like wind and solar and so on. And every country in the world has the possibility of using a large share of renewables and other low-carbon sources. So I think really the responsibility, if you like, is in all countries of the world now to have a clear and defined pathway to shifting away from all fossil fuels as quickly as possible.
Dr. AJ Gambier, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
In today's other climate news, the UK needs to cut its global environmental footprint by 75% by the end of the decade to help nature recover. The WWF says the UK's impact on climate is disproportionately high, but could be reduced through measures such as reducing food waste and ensuring all marine resources come from sustainable sources.
These last couple of years, we've seen just extraordinary outbursts of fires around the world. The horrible fires we're seeing in British Columbia at the moment. Cyprus I saw yesterday, but Siberia, Amazon, Australia, we're seeing these extreme weather events. Those will become the norm, sadly. And we know that we're losing species around the world as well. And don't forget, since 1900, 500 types of vertebrates have gone extinct. So these are animals no one will ever see again. And those risks will increase if we don't take action now.
Jonathan Bartley is stepping down from his role as Green Party co-leader. His fellow co-leader, Sian Berry, will continue as acting leader until a leadership election takes place. Bartley is the longest-serving leader the party has had and called his 5 years there an immense privilege. New Zealand has experienced its hottest June in more than a century. Figures from the National Institute of Water and Atmospheric Research show the average temperatures were 2 degrees higher than normal, despite a polar blast that hit the country just last week. The NIWA says the weather was a result of high sea level air pressure and climate change. And a campaign to rewild the South Downs National Park has been launched. 13,000 hectares, that's the equivalent of 21,000 football pitches, is set to be restored to its original condition in order to create more habitats for plants and animals. It's part of a UN-backed initiative to increase protected areas for nature by 30% by 2030. Afghanistan is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to climate change, but one of the least well-equipped to cope with the impact it may have. And as NATO troops withdraw, there are concerns for how the country will be able to adapt as the climate crisis intensifies. Well, in a moment, I'll be speaking to the International Rescue Committee's country director in Kabul. But first, here's a snapshot of some of Afghanistan's climate challenges.
یا 15 روپیه یا 20 روپیه رو میاره همین رو میخورم.
دولت که کمک نکرد مال در امید ازی شیسته هستیم که دولت کمک میکنه مجبور هستیم مال دخترای خود بچهای خود سودا میکنیم گردای خود میکشیم سودا میکنیم اما زندگی خود میبریم پیش ما چطور کنیم
Well, joining me now from Kabul is Vicky Aiken, Afghanistan Country Director at the International Rescue Committee. So, Vicky Aiken, Afghanistan extremely vulnerable to climate change. So what do you think it could mean for the country?
Well, we currently have 12.2 million people, nearly a third of the population, in emergency or crisis food insecurity. So, for example, many of the crops are being destroyed in the fighting. There are explosive remnants of war contaminating fields. And then many of the highways are blocked by the conflict. So if a farmer is harvesting fresh produce and has to wait 5 days or so to get his food to the market, then that food is going to be destroyed.
And how could climate change manifest itself there in Afghanistan? Is the biggest worry droughts or floods or avalanches? How could it play out?
So it plays out all of the above. In different areas of the country, we see severe flooding, and in others, we see severe droughts. And in some of the areas, like Badghis in the west, you see both. The last severe drought was just a couple of years ago in 2018. And with that drought, we saw more than 250,000 people displaced from their homes. We hope this time to try to prevent people from leaving their homes by providing aid to them where they live. It was a study done after the last drought showed that it would take the average person 16 years to pay off the debt they accumulated during those few months. And since then, the country has been devastated by the impact of COVID, and the level of people living under the poverty line has increased from 50% to over 70%.
Vicky Aiken, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, jobs in green industries might not only be good for the environment, but for our pockets too. The think tank Onward has found that industries such as renewable energy could pay workers 30% more than their carbon-intensive counterparts. But the UK workforce is underprepared for the transition to net zero, with the report saying more than 3 million employees will need to retrain in specialist skills and technical qualifications. Adam Karambata made the move from working in oil to renewable energy.
The trigger for me to transition at that point was more about the decline in oil prices back in 2014-15. So I really needed to pivot to a market that was looking more healthy and buoyant. And by luck, I was given the chance to really start recruiting into renewable energy, which is now my mainstream business. Oh, absolutely. It's one of the best decisions I've made in my career, if not the best.
And finally, it's a blooming good year for climate change awareness at the Hampton Court Palace Garden Festival. Gardens that highlight efforts to tackle plastic pollution and the impact of fast fashion all feature at the event. Horticultural hero Tom Stewart Smith's garden includes a climate-resilient meadow, showcasing plants that grow in hot conditions and are becoming increasingly common in the UK. Well, that's everything from us for today. Coming up tomorrow, I'll be talking to actor, presenter and WWF ambassador Kel Spellman about the first ever Great Big Green Week. You can find out more about that at the same time here on Sky News. See you then.